Most of us take our hearing for granted, yet over 10% of Americans have some level of hearing loss, and that number is increasing. Over 200 Minnesota infants are born each year with hearing loss. Some people experience acute loss at some point in their life because of infections, trauma, or loud noises. And many more of us start to gradually lose our hearing over our lifetime. By age 65, about 40% of Americans have obviously hearing problems. By age 75, nearly half of people have significant hearing loss. Given the large and growing number of people affected with hearing loss and the fact that some of this can be prevented, it is evident that this is a significant public health issue. That's why in today's episode of A Public Health Journal, we're going to talk about hearing loss, its causes, and what can be done to protect our hearing, and the services that are available. Please stay tuned.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal, a program that explores public health issues facing our society today and tomorrow. The host of the show is Dr. Ed Ellinger, Commissioner of Health for the state of Minnesota. A Public Health Journal is sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Health and the Hennepin County Human Services and Public Health Department, all working together towards the goal of healthy people living in healthy communities.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal. Today we're going to look at the issue of hearing loss, an issue that affects hundreds of thousands of individuals at all ages of life. We'll be looking at the causes of hearing loss, ways to prevent it, and services that are available. Joining me in this discussion are Mary Hartnett, Executive Director, Commission of DeafBlind, and Hard of Hearing Minnesotans, and Monique Hammond, a registered pharmacist who has become an advocate for people with hearing loss after acutely losing her hearing in her left ear. Mary, Monique, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
And we've got two people who have come at hearing loss from a little different perspective. Mary, how long have you been involved with hearing and hearing loss, deaf-blind kinds of issues?
I guess close to 40 years. I started out as a sign language interpreter, and then the more that I worked in the field, I realized that I was becoming part of a civil rights movement. At the beginning of a civil rights movement, when I started in the field, sign language interpreters were just starting to be used. There was no Americans with Disabilities Act. The laws that were just getting put in place that required that children who have disabilities have the right to an education. All of that started about 40 years ago, and I was there at the start of it, and it was a very exciting time.
Right. So you've been at it for a long time, and lots of changes. And Monique, you're just involved in hearing loss issues relatively recently, right?
Yes, until I came down with a very sudden, unexpected hearing loss in my left ear. It took all about 4 hours for me to go totally deaf. It was a gradual shutdown. And then I came up with balance issues. I actually had wonderful normal hearing. It was my keenest sense. And then, of course, life changed. And that was September 12th, 2005. And so I have only been involved that long, but it has been a very interesting journey and oftentimes also a depressing one. Yeah. But there is a little work to be done.
Right. That's why it's nice to have both of you on, have that longer-term perspective and a little bit more short-term perspective. And I'm going to start, Mary, talking with you about who has, or how many people have hearing loss. I said 10%. Is that a number that people recognize as the number?
Actually, it varies, but 10% is the number that most of us use. Which means in the state of Minnesota, with a population of about 5 million, we're looking at about 500,000 people, which is a significant number. There's varying estimates. A lot of times for example, within the census, there's not a lot of, there are very few questions that are dealing with hearing loss, but they have different measures that they use, and those are the ones that we stay with.
I've got a slide that kind of outlines the number of folks in different categories. Maybe you could kind of walk us through what this slide is showing.
Sure. Well, with babies, in 2007, the state started to require that all newborns be screened for hearing loss at birth. Prior to that time, we had a voluntary system. The rest of the country, most of the states had mandates, and we didn't. And we were behind in the number of babies that we were reporting to the Department of Health and being able to report and respond with intervention. Because if babies are identified at birth, the research shows that if they're identified and get intervention by 6 months, they are able to achieve developmental milestones, outcomes that are on par with their hearing peers. If they don't, they lag far behind in linguistic development, cognitive, social, and emotional development.
Okay,
so this is very important. So now we are currently identifying about 200 babies a year. And again, it's only been 5 years since we've had the system in place. We believe that those numbers will go up to about, probably close to 300 over time.
Right. Then we have the adolescents and the veterans and the baby boomers, the
Right.
categories that people say, why are they getting hearing loss?
I'll let Monique get to adolescents, but with the veterans, it's the most prevalent disability that returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan are coming back with because of the IEDs, the explosive devices that are put on the roadside bombs. So we hear a lot about traumatic brain injury, which certainly is very important, but the hearing loss is progressive over time. And most of the veterans experience these IEDs and are on disability because of hearing loss, many of them.
So obviously that hearing loss can occur at many times, or various places during life and for various different, because I've got another slide that kind of shows the different causes that you may want to, just briefly, I mean, we won't go through each one of these, but there are some things that people are born with and some that hearing loss that are acquired.
Right.
Sort of what's in these kind of categories?
Well, for congenital, I mean, it can be genetic factors. And when I started out, most of the time, a lot of the etiology was unknown, or 70%, I think, at the time. Now, a large percentage of the etiology or causes of deafness at birth are able to be identified through genetic factors. It could be different infections. There can be a number of different causes that are congenital, or they cause it. There can be toxemia, lack of oxygen at birth, but a lot of what we know is genetic in nature. With acquired losses, there's many. I mean, some could be a progressive hearing loss over time because of aging. Some of it is there can be mumps. There could be ototoxic drugs. Sometimes people are treated for different conditions, and deafness can be caused by drugs that you're allergic to, and that result in deafness. Meningitis, measles, encephalitis, sometimes flu, sometimes the mumps. So, but a lot, I think, a large part of it with the acquired loss can be exposure to noise. My husband worked in construction. He has a significant hearing loss in both of his ears. Farmers, we talked about those before. And then Monique's big campaign is kids that are using iPads, or adults that use iPads, having excessive exposure to noise. So noise-induced hearing loss.
Right. And Monique, what was the cause of your hearing loss?
Well, my type of hearing loss was determined to be a sudden sensory neural hearing loss, and although that sounds very impressive, it's pretty imprecise, because only about 10 to 15% of people who come down with this sudden hearing loss actually find out what caused it. And in order to be a sudden loss, it has to happen over a period of less than 3 days, and mine happened over about 4 hours. And so, of course, they do all of the testing, they do the MRI, because one of the things that we do not want to do is miss anything. And some people just go and have their hearing tested and then they get a hearing aid right away. But there are many reasons of why the doctors should be looking into this, because there are so many causes like we just talked about. And since so many people never find out what really caused that sudden sensory neural hearing loss, some people tend to ignore it. It's often undiagnosed and misdiagnosed. But for me, it was probably an underlying viral infection, because viruses are notorious for attacking nerve tissue. We know that from shingles, for instance, where all of a sudden the chickenpox virus comes back. And so it can be viruses, and in my case, it was also a very loud noise exposure the day before I came down with this event, of at all places a church fundraiser. And so we have to start saying when something is too loud, but nobody ever speaks up. And so the doctors figured that that was an insult that went on top of the injury. And the day off, where I actually did come down with the hearing loss, I had a brief but intense stress reaction. And vascular situations can also be causing blood flow decrease to the ear, and also bring down the hearing. So they called it the perfect storm.
Yeah, you had the triple whammy.
I had probably had, it was maybe the ear infection. I might have not ever known about it. Sometimes we have viruses that we are not even aware of them. And so maybe I might have come out of that one, but then when the noise came, and then when the stress reaction came, It just was too much.
Right. Well, I want to talk about the impact that hearing loss has on you personally and sort of on this population. But first, we need to take a little break.
Okay.
We'll be back right after this message.
It's always wildfire season somewhere in America. Nearly 9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by the carelessness of humans and could be prevented. But together, we can make a difference.
Watch what I can do!
Help protect the home of our forest friends.
Come on! You can do it!
Only you can prevent wildfires.
To find out more, log on to SmokeyBear.com.
Welcome back. We're talking about hearing loss with Mary Hartnett, Executive Director of the Commission for Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing Minnesotans, and Monique Hammond, a pharmacist and an advocate for people with hearing loss after having an acute hearing loss on her own. And Monique, I want to follow up with the fact that 5 or 6 years ago you had this acute hearing loss. How did that change your life? What kind of impact has your loss of hearing had on you?
Well, because it happened so fast, it had a tremendous physical implication and also a psychological one, because all of a sudden my normal life was not normal anymore. And hearing loss basically affects every single phase of our lives. It affects us socially, because if you don't hear very well, then oftentimes you misunderstand, you misinterpret. And so it leads to difficulties conversing with people and relating to people, and also to work partners, actually. It affects us emotionally, because eventually people, hearing becomes like a job, and communication becomes tiring. And so people sort of isolate themselves and they withdraw. And so then it is a very short distance to travel to depression. And it affects us professionally, because also there is a bias and a stigma attached to hearing loss in our social world that translates very well to the professional world. And so people with hearing loss, depending on how deep the decline is, have a dickens of a time finding a job and keeping a job. And so we'll have to see how that translates now with the younger demographics coming in, and what employers actually have to do for accommodation. It affects us financially, because people with hearing loss oftentimes do not get the jobs. They are oftentimes unemployed and underemployed. And so if I don't make enough money to support myself and my family, well, then all of a sudden people end up on social services. Mm-hmm. And it is also expensive to treat, because we have now heard about how expensive actually hearing aids are, and the prices are on the upswing, especially as we're getting apps to our hearing aids now. And then, as Mary pointed out, it affects us also educationally, starting with the children. And with older people, as you do not hear so well anymore and you kind of get shut down, all of a sudden they don't acquire new knowledge anymore, and they do not make new memories anymore. And so the hearing loss then even becomes worse for them. And so it's an isolating disorder, and it is a chronic disorder, and we call it the invisible disability,
Right. Mary,
and actually, I need to jump in here, because 1% of the population is the signing deaf community, who celebrate who they are, their culture of being deaf, of American Sign Language, of the traditions that come along with being deaf. And so they do not see themselves as having a disability, but having a rich and vibrant culture. So they would not agree with Monique. We have an advisory board with 15 governor-appointed members. We are a non-cabinet state agency, and Monique was a wonderful contributing member. But you cannot say that any one person's experience with hearing loss is the same. So we have a diversity of people at the table with a diversity of experiences. Certainly the impact on education and the impact on employment is there. The signing deaf community would say that many of those causes are as a result of autism, AUDISM, which is discrimination based on somebody's ability to hear. That if you can't hear, that people discriminate against you, and there's a bias toward hearing people in this culture. That if videos that are made without captioning, many inaccessible environments, sign language interpreters need to be provided. There's many changes that have happened and occurred over time, but the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed 22 years ago. And the level of employment or engagement of employment with people with disabilities was about 22%. In 22 years, that level of employment has not increased 1%. So it's given people the right to sue, but it really hasn't changed the practice of employers. And we need to find a way to make it easier for employers to hire people to provide the accommodations, the sign language interpreters, the assistive technology that needs to be there.
So I suspect, as you point out, there's a diversity of diseases, of conditions, of things that happen to people that cause the hearing loss, and people respond differently in different ways.
People would never say, people that are from the signing deaf community would never say they have a disease or a medical
Well,
condition.
but there are, like meningitis is a disease that causes hearing loss. I mean, that's what I'm saying, that it's a disease that leads to hearing loss. And so, but I suspect if you have hearing loss when you're born with hearing loss, it affects your growth and development unless, and you need some particular interventions to prevent any kind of problems from, and the same thing at other stages of life when you develop hearing loss. It's the interventions, the supports, the accommodations that really are important.
Dr. Ellinger, I just wanted to make another point, and that is exactly what Mary was saying. The world of hearing loss accommodates many people, and we all have it to a certain degree. I'm talking from the point of view of somebody who had really good hearing and then lost it. And that's what is happening to many people. And so my case is one of people who are hard of hearing. And so the deaf community is a different community, and I would never assume that I could even talk about their issues, because they are fighting a totally different battle altogether. And people oftentimes in our general public can relate to what it might be like to be deaf, to not hear at all. But people who are hard of hearing are oftentimes, they have very difficulty to relate to them, because what does that mean to be hard of hearing? How does it affect you? And so, but that's my point of view, that's where I am coming from. So I am talking from that point of view, and I wanted to clarify that.
I want to talk about screening and the services available. We need to take another little break. Sure. So we'll be back right after this message.
Traditional light bulbs actually generate 9 times more heat than light. Switch to Energy Star light bulbs, and you'll realize just how much cash you were really burning through. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov.
Welcome back. We're talking about hearing loss with Mary Hartnett, the Executive Director of the Commission of Deaf, DeafBlind, and Hard of Hearing Minnesotans, and Monique Hammond, a pharmacist and advocate for people with hearing loss, particularly those with acute hearing loss later on in life. I want to make sure that we talk about how do we identify people with hearing loss, what kind of screenings are available. I want to talk about the services that are available to folks, so that and also how do we prevent hearing loss from becoming such a huge problem in our society. How do we screen for hearing loss, and is it important to screen?
Well, with babies, it happens automatically at birth. And actually, one of the gaps was home births. And I just ran into somebody the other day, and your department, the Department of Health, has just bridged that gap by getting some grants to make sure that home births are having newborn screening, because that's the way that we can screen for hearing loss at birth, the most effective way. And then there's a whole system that supports families that have babies with hearing loss, and a hotline that's called Help Me Grow, that can help get the interventions that children or babies and families need to be able to have typical developmental milestones. Then the Department of Health also has screenings that follow along and work in partnership with the schools to make sure that there's hearing screening that goes along with children. With veterans, it happens and should happen automatically. With I would say, with adolescents, it isn't typical to get hearing screening. My daughter never had any of that, but I think that if your kid is using iPhones or any MP3 players and has them on full blast, that they should be warned, and that they should, and perhaps you should be encouraging screening for their kids when they're having a pediatric visit. I also, with boomers, anybody over the age of 65, I think that you should start to wonder, if you're starting to say, with Monique's book, What Did You Say? I mean, if you're starting to say, what did you say? I think that seniors really need to have that as part of their physical and start to speak up. So it isn't a part of a screening, and I think that it should be a regular part of a checkup.
Right. And what about the prevention? Monique, what are you suggesting? I mean, you have a book that talks about the diagnosis and treatment and interventions, and how do you talk about prevention? What are the things that we need to do for preventing hearing loss?
Well, of course, we cannot escape our genetics. We also cannot avoid every single virus and every bacteria that is out there. We also cannot slow down the aging process. But one thing that we can do is turn down the volume in our lives. It is so noisy out there, and we're advertising noise as being fun and interesting, and even children are saying that you have to feel the movie. So you turn up the volume and then it is cool. And this is, we do not know that, and we do not realize, and we do not promote the fact that excess noise is actually poisonous and toxic to our ears. And so my first situation would be that I would say we have to go on actually on a public health awareness kind of an effort to tell people about this and to turn down the volume, to protect our ears if it is too loud. We used to say if it is too loud, it really is, but then after we stay for a while, the brain adapts, and pretty soon we think we get used to it. When we get used to it, that's a danger sign. And so that's probably the most power that we have. Turning down the volume, asking people to turn down the volume, to asking them in restaurants to turn down the volume, because we are just poisoning our ears. And so doing noise prevention, I think, is probably the most effective way of what we can do, and where everybody can be active.
What about the occupational aspects of noise? I mean, aren't there OSHA requirements for noise?
OSHA requires that when it goes up to 85 decibels, noise is measured in decibels, and they say that an 8-hour exposure over an average 85 decibel noise level, that is enough for the day for the ears. And at that point in time, you have to go home and you have to turn down the volume, because the ears have taken all they can for that day. But unfortunately, we do not do that. We get in the car, we turn up the stereo very loud, and then we go home and we turn the surround sound on. And so after 85 decibels, actually noise reducing equipment is used, earplugs or noise reducing headphones or earmuffs or something to protect the ears. And so, but in our daily lives, we do not realize how loud things really are. And that's where they are online. There are also areas where you can find how loud something is. Like some of those iPods that we have, they can actually go up to like 100, 110 dB.
Yeah, I suspect the little earbuds that put in, and you put the noise concentrated in your ears have to be pretty dangerous.
Absolutely, and you're supposed to be having only like a few minutes a day to that, and people are listening to it for hours.
So what services are available in the few minutes that we have left? Mary, what does your commission do?
My commission doesn't offer direct services. We look at public policy solutions to barriers that people that are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing face in education, healthcare, employment, technology, and access to public services. The Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division, the state of Minnesota, and the Department of Human Services offers direct services. They have 4 regional offices, 8 regional advisory committees, and then they can provide kind of a gateway into services for the state. And they also have a telephone equipment distribution program for people that need assistive devices. The Minnesota STAR program has some assistive devices for people that are deaf, blind, and hard of hearing that they can tap into. Then there's, of course, special education services within the state of Minnesota. There's teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing, and then there's teachers that are specialists in working with kids that have a combined hearing loss who are deafblind.
So what are sort of the policy issues that you work on?
Oh, well,
because I assume, like in most things in public health, it's the policies that make the biggest difference than the services.
Completely, right. Well, with the early hearing detection and intervention, newborn hearing screening, we were the agency that took the lead and put together a coalition of people to get that legislation passed. Along with supports, we got legislation passed using evidence-based research with the Joint Commission on Infant Hearing. It was through the CDC, and they made recommendations for what needs to be in place in every state for it to be a successful program. Not only hearing screening, but the interventions that need to be in place. So we knew that the number of children was going to go up within the Department of Health. with hearing loss, but so we needed to make a system that was welcoming for children in the Department of Education as they got transferred. So we got legislation passed that required there to be a coordinator within the state for services for kids with hearing loss. We got supports for families, what are called parent guides for parents who are experienced and have gone through the system, that are trained, that are teaching other parents the resources that are available, their choices. We have deaf mentors who can go into a family, and if the family chooses, to teach American Sign Language in the home. We have a hearing aid loaner bank, so baby gets, upon identification, immediate access to hearing if the family chooses.
We're running out of time, and I do want to. We have about 30 seconds left. And hearing aids, you bring that up, and Monique, what can you say in 30 seconds about hearing aids? Is it something that there's good controls over? We have good hearing aids that are available for folks.
There are various degrees, of hearing loss, and so we also need various types of hearing aids. And hearing aids, however, they do not fix hearing loss. Hearing aids help us to make the most out of what we have left. And so that's very important, and more important than having good technology out there, and we have good technology. We need to have also dispensers, and we need to have audiologists to understand the hearing loss, understand the emotional outfall from hearing loss, and also understand what the instrument can and cannot do for us. And that's also very important.
Good. Well, this is a huge topic, and we've just scratched the surface,
Yes.
but we're going to put some contact information so people can call or go on site to get some information about hearing. And you have a book, Monique. What
Yes.
did you say about your hearing loss? And a lot of good information in that. So thank you for helping us get to the bottom of a huge problem, but one that is preventable in many cases. So thanks for being with us. And I'll be back with a closing comment right after this message.
Severe weather can destroy a home in seconds. There's no time to think, only time to act. Have a kit so you're ready for any emergency. Develop a plan for what you and your family will do before disaster strikes. And stay informed during severe weather any way you can. It can be the difference between losing your possessions and losing your life. Just ask the owners of this house.
Visit weather.com/ready and let the Weather Channel help you prepare your family for emergencies.
Helen Keller, the first deafblind person to receive a bachelor's degree, stated, quote, "Blindness cuts you off from things. Deafness cuts you off from people," end quote. Obviously, hearing is important and helps connect us with the people in the world around us. But the ability to hear is only part of that story. The other part is listening, and that requires much more than just our auditory connection with the world around us. To be meaningfully connected with the people in the world around us means that we have to use all of our senses and take the time and make the effort to listen. We really need all of our senses to listen to the beauty of nature and the creativity of humans, to the joy and the sorrow that is all around us, to the hopes and dreams of children and adults. We need all of our being for listening to the stories told every day that provide a unique description of the challenges that face us and teach us how to best address those challenges. The physical aspect of hearing are important, but they are best used when combined with active listening. As the Chinese proverb states, to listen well is as powerful a means of influence as to talk well, and is as essential to all true conversation. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you can join us again next time on A Public Health Journal.